When you look at some of these complex threats, there are a lot of very great minds that have been working on how to address them. From your guys' standpoint, what are the ways to, for example, address the breakdowns of democratic states, right? We've seen that happening in Turkey where Erdogan has dismantled a state. You could look at that in Venezuela as to what Chavez and Maduro have done there. A state now that was one of the most prosperous in Latin America now is chaotic. And you've seen that in Hungary, certainly, in terms of how the process, and you can even say that in Russia that has been the case, although to a more limited degree because it was never really exactly a proper and full democracy. So from your guys' standpoint, how does the United States have to exert its influence in a world where the United States does not have that margin of influence that it once had in terms of it is the indispensable power, but it's no longer the overwhelming power? And China is one of the countries that's going around the world and saying, we don't really care what your human rights record is. Let's just strike trade transactionally on acceptable terms to us. And we really don't care what you have to do, for example, for the extraction of rare earths. How does the United States need to differently use its influence to achieve these sort of very lofty and very complex gains, the security aims?
You know, a very loaded question. The rise of China is not something you can stop. So the question is, how do you accommodate in the long term? How do you get the large powers and the small powers essentially to converge their interests? Do they converge them by the Americans turning into a dictatorship that mirrors Putin's Russia? You know, hopefully not. What I see is at the same time that you name these countries, and there are others as well who are sliding in the wrong direction. You know, look at the Arab Spring. Look at the internet generation around the world. There have been huge demonstrations, not only in Venezuela, but in Moscow, in Hong Kong, in Malaysia over corruption, as well as the Arab Street, as well as Tehran. This is a global phenomenon. And my belief, and I think the thesis that you find in the article Tom and I put together, is that the drift of history is really toward sovereignty that belongs to the people. Whether it's under a monarchy, as in the Gulf, that's not an illegitimate way to govern if you have a social contract where you're delivering for all the people. You know, we've debated what is democracy, and we've been a little bit too sort of flowery and aspirational in some of our inaugural addresses in recent years. And people say, well, what does that mean? You've seen elections in Palestine, in Algeria, and places like that, where the results weren't acceptable and we kind of rejected them. Democracy is really measured by whether you uphold the rights of everybody, including minorities, minority communities, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, genders, elderly, young. And in a place like Iran, for example, those rights are not upheld at all. In a place like Russia, you have people who are on the outs. In China, the Uyghurs, and actually a lot of Chinese have no say whatsoever in the politics. You also have high-level corruption, which is invisible. So how do you fight back against that? Number one, you sort of remember, what do you stand for? You sort of stand with the world population on this. If you remember, you know, who actually can relate to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, it's not the autocrats who have billions stashed in foreign banks. It's really the people. And it doesn't mean that we should foment revolution. It just means that we should stand with our basic principles, uphold the norms that accommodate the rights of people around the world. Remember that justice is the most powerful concept in world affairs. Justice. And if America is seen as upholding justice, we will be safer. If we are seen as not caring about justice, we're going to have a world of hurt. So I think that with that, you have to manage relations with these other countries. And we will transact with China, Russia, Iran, maybe North Korea, who knows, maybe even Syria. I don't think so, but you never know. But the point is we should never forget how many principles these people have violated, and we should hold them to account. They have a lot of secrets, by the way. I would tell the intelligence community, and we have advised in our article, to start collecting on their dirty little secrets so that we have leverage over them.